Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar about the culture of quality. My name is Niels Nugtrin. Thanks for joining. We're just gathering, so please make yourself comfortable. We'll start the session in maybe a minute or so. Just give some people time to join, any stragglers. All right, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Niels Nugtrin. Thank you for joining today's webinar about a really interesting topic, one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is culture of quality. In today's webinar, we're going to dive into this incredibly important topic. The webinar should last about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on specifics and how many questions there are. We will include time at the end for Q&A. And there will also be two polls during the presentation to foster some sharing of experiences. Please share any questions that you might have through the webinar private chat facility. You can do this during the presentation. As said, we'll have a Q&A at the end, but if your question is relevant to the topic at hand, just put it in the private chat, and I'll make sure that it gets answered either at that moment or at the end. So I also wanted to remind you all, or let you all know, that you will also be sent a recording of the webinar at the end. So that's coming your way. And yeah, just look forward to getting started. So let me jump right in. Let's see. All right, excellent. So let's go through the agenda together. Introductions, we'll start with very brief introductions, then move right on to starting to define what is a culture of quality, because it's a very abstract topic, of course, so we need to get on the same page as to what we're talking about. We'll also spend a minute discussing why it matters so much. From there, we'll move on to how do you recognize a culture of quality. We'll look at what a poor culture of quality looks like, as well as a strong culture of quality. Then we'll get into our first survey, and we'll ask you all about your own experiences with your own culture of quality in any organization that you work for. And then we'll move towards the more forward-looking part of the presentation or webinar, which is about how you can build a culture of quality. So we'll start to get very practical on some things that you can do to drive a positive culture of quality in your organization. Then we'll do another survey about how you could measure culture of quality or quality in general, and then we'll do Q&A and wrap up. All right, so in terms of introductions, just very briefly, Alice QI is a company that focuses on quality management software. We're one of the pioneers in integrated quality management. Our platform is an integrated quality management suite called Alice QI. We tend to focus on batch and process manufacturing industries. Our solution is cloud native and works on mobile platforms as well as normal laptops, PCs, Apples, etc. And key thing about our solution is that it's a no-code solution, so it's highly configurable, and but you can end users, quality users, can configure the software themselves, and so they're empowered to change the behavior of our software without being dependent on their IT department. All right, that's enough about us. I will jump right in now, and I'd like to start talking about what it is actually, culture and culture of quality. So if you were to research what culture of quality is or what culture is, you'll find lots and lots of different interpretations and definitions. So I've prepared for you a definition that I think is useful in this context, and I want to dissect it together with you to make sure that we all understand the key points. Well, so if we look at the definition, culture of quality is the set of shared values, attitudes, and actions established by leaders that form the behavioral foundations for an optimized work environment. All right, so let's take this one by one. The first thing to note is that culture is an amorphous set of things, right? It's a collection of values, attitudes, behaviors, actions. It's not just an ISO quality standard or a quality management system or a vision statement or posters on the wall. It is really a collection of all sorts of things and primarily focused around human behavior, right? But it starts with shared values. And then, of course, as one of my friends likes to say, John Blankensoft, who's a leader in the quality management industry, culture is a verb. So the important thing about this to remember is that culture is all about how we behave. Another thing to note is that it's established by leaders. So culture starts at the top typically. We all tend to look towards our leaders as an example. And so it's important to understand that it really is a leadership responsibility in the end to define, set, and drive a culture. And then when that happens, what you'll see is that that culture becomes the behavioral foundation for an optimized work environment. So if you have a strong culture of quality, what you'll notice is that people start to align their behavior and their actions in a certain way that tends to be beneficial for the outcomes that an organization has defined. All right, so I hope that's clear. We'll touch on a bunch of these points later on, but I think it's good to get on the same page in terms of what we're trying to discuss here. So why would you care about a culture of quality? I mean, why is it even important to focus on it? In the end, I think it's most easily explained by understanding that a culture of quality drives actual good quality, and then good quality in the end leads to good business. So there's a rather direct relationship between the culture of your organization and how healthy it is from a business perspective. Organizations with strong cultures of quality tend to trend in a positive direction with all the key indicators, business indicators that are important to business leadership. Think about more revenue, lower costs, increased profits, higher customer satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera. So in the end, driving a culture of quality matters because if you want your organization to perform well in the marketplace, it's really one of the best things that you can do to ensure that. As Peter Drucker once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And really what he means there is not that strategy is not important. Of course it is. But a strong culture of quality is at the highest point in the pyramid. If you have a strong culture of quality, then everything else seems to flow from there, including a good strategy and then, of course, strong execution. So let's take a look at what culture looks like on the ground, and we'll look at an example of a weak culture of quality as well as a strong culture of quality. And we'll start with the weak culture of quality. What we typically see in these organizations is that and I want to, before I jump into these things, I want to emphasize that organizations with a weak culture of quality, they do exist, of course, and not just a little bit, but quite a lot. Having a poor culture of quality doesn't always lead towards to the ultimate demise of a company. In a recent survey, actually, amongst quality professionals, or actually employees in general, I believe, people self-reported that, or 50% of the people surveyed self-reported that they believe that the organization that they work for is of an average culture, has an average culture of quality or weaker. So it's quite prevalent, this weak culture of quality. It's not some exception, it's really all around us. And the reason why they can continue to exist, and they do exist, is because oftentimes these organizations are propped up by the heroics of certain individuals that hustle and work hard to save the day. So these are typically crucial individuals in various points of the organization that just make sure that the organization doesn't fall over. The culture or the quality is not institutionalized in the process, but it really hinges on these few heroes of the day. Another thing that you see in these organizations is that quality is rarely discussed, right? Unless, of course, things go wrong, then it's discussed quite a lot. And often that discussion comes along with a lot of blaming and shaming and finger pointing. And as a result, it's typically not an enjoyable organization to work for. What you see is that employees lack a sense of organizational pride and have a lower job satisfaction in general. And then another key point is that organizations with a weak culture of quality, they're very slow to change. So it becomes incredibly difficult to change anything really in an organization that has a poor culture of quality. And I think a key reason for that has to do with that first bullet, the fact that often these organizations rely on certain individuals to perform. And what you see is that these individuals, they have sort of a baked in incentive, of course, to not change because they're important in the organization. And, that's an enjoyable feeling. They're, and by institutionalizing culture and sort of quality and democratizing it across the organization through process and standards and all the other things, really their importance in the organization would decline. And so there's typically a resistance to change in these organizations. All right, so let's take a look at what a strong organization looks like with a strong culture of quality. It's obviously a lot of the opposite, but a key thing that you'll see is that quality is discussed every day, at all levels of the organization, from left to right and from bottom to top. And especially leadership talks about quality, and not just when things go wrong, but when things go right. So people are rewarded for good behavior as much as they are challenged and coached when results are not good. The other key point is that quality is defined. So there's actually a definition of what quality is, and it's measured, and that information about how we're currently performing against the quality standards flows freely. So there's no information hiding, there's no friction around information flow. Whatever it is that your job is, wherever you are in the organization, you have information available to you that allows you to know how you are performing. And that's really important because people tend to like to know what their contribution is to the overall outcomes of an organization. People like a sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose comes from knowing how you're doing objectively. What you'll also see is that problems are discussed easily, and improvements flow naturally from that. So problems aren't discussed in the context of blaming or finger pointing, but just discussed sort of rationally and analytically. How did this happen? What's the root cause? What can we do about it? And of course, at all times, there's someone ultimately accountable for problems, but you tend to see a team, the organization as a whole tends to rally around that problem and attack it as a team. And as a result, people are less afraid to make mistakes. They're happier to talk about their mistakes. They're happier to ask about how they can improve their performance. And as a result, there's generally a higher job satisfaction and a much higher level of organizational pride. And especially over time, when that organization, through all these, beneficial characteristics or traits, tends to perform better year over year. And what you see in the long run is that people start to feel very proud of working in a winning team. All right, so before we continue the rest of the webinar, I'd like to involve you all in this discussion. And so I'd like to ask you if you would participate in this survey and let me know how you feel about your organization's culture of quality. And you can provide your answer in the panel. I'd like to remind everybody that this is anonymous, so neither the attendees nor the administrators and the Alice QI side can see your answer. We only see the answers in aggregate. So please share your experiences freely, and then I'd like to discuss that with you. All right. So what I'm seeing here, the results are flowing in, very interesting, is sort of a, still some results coming in, but generally what I'm seeing here is a little bit of a normal curve distribution. So there's a few people on either end of the normal curve. Every day is a battle, and one or two close to perfect. The majority of you are in the middle with a slight skew towards the weaker side of quality and culture. And I'd like to say that you are, that is by no means, sorry, let me just skip back actually. There we go. Let's get back to the previous slide. You're by no means in the, special in that regard. As I said before, having a weaker culture of quality is something that is very prevalent. And that's not hard to understand, really. I think, first of all, our experiences and observations corroborate that. But second of all, building a culture of quality is very, very difficult. It pays off. It's definitely worth it. And if you can achieve a strong culture of quality, it's the gift that keeps on giving. But it's not easy to do, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can achieve that later on. So, all right, so let's move on now to the next slide. First, what I'd like to do, so we're started moving towards the more forward-looking part of this webinar. So how can we actually influence or achieve a culture of quality? And before we get into the actionable stuff, I'd like to spend a little bit more time defining what a culture of quality means at a slightly more tangible level. And there are different ways to break down culture and quality, but a way that I think is very useful is to look at it from three angles: ownership, awareness, and involvement. And if you can achieve a high level of these three things in your organization, I think that quality will sort of derive from this. So what do we mean by ownership? First of all, what that means is that we should hold each other accountable for outcomes. So while effort and intentions are important, ultimately we need to be focused on results. And what's very important is that we don't only focus on the negative. We have to focus on good and bad outcomes, and we have to incentivize, reward, praise for good outcomes. That's just as important, maybe even more important than coaching or challenging bad outcomes. The other key point to this is that this is not just leadership's responsibility. So it's not just up to management, so to speak, to hold people accountable for outcomes. Of course, it is also up to them, and maybe even primarily up to them. But in organizations with a strong culture of quality, what you see is that the organization tends to be sort of self-correcting. So also peers tend to weigh in on these matters. And that's a really key point because, peers can be very powerful in terms of shaping behavior. Ultimately, I think it's human nature not just to look up towards your leadership, but also look to your left and to your right and see what others are doing. And so, that's why it's as a collective responsibility. I think that's a strong achievement if that can be if that's seen in an organization. All right. So what about awareness? What do we mean by awareness? Well, first of all, we have to have defined goals, and then we have to collect and share relevant information, quality information, so that performance is transparent. I mean, this may sound trivial, and I'm sure for many of you it is, but you'd be surprised to know how many organizations actually, don't do well on this. So, problems that we see are that goals can be abstract. They can be maybe not abstract, maybe very concrete, but they're not measured periodically for some type of reason, either because the systems aren't in place to do that or because there's no governance in place to do it regularly. Sometimes they're defined and collected, but not really discussed regularly, so that you see maybe once a quarter, once whatever, a month, somebody throws up a slide with performance results, but they're not really discussed on a daily basis or with a periodicity that actually changes behavior. So it's important that we have that lodestar. We all need to know which direction we have to run, but we also need to know how far is that finish line, right, to stay motivated. The last point, involvement, is also key. That is really making the point that the responsibility for culture or for quality is shared. So quality is everyone's responsibility, not just the responsibility of the quality teams. That's really a very common mistake, is that what we see is that quality teams are relegated sort of off to the side. They're positioned as gatekeepers. Their job is to make sure that bad product doesn't leave the factory. But quality is not really a mindset and a shared responsibility throughout the organization. So what you see is that you have one part of the organization just looking to push product and get it through and get it out the door, and then you have this other team that's really looking to prevent bad product from leaving the factory. And really what it should be is a joint responsibility where quality takes responsibility for productivity and throughput and volume, as well as quality, and production or operations also takes responsibility for the qualitative aspects of the production. All right, now that we have these tenets defined, let's move towards how we can actually shape a culture of quality. Now, what I'm going to share here with you is a 5-step plan, which is pretty universal. This actually applies to any type of team, organization, company, regardless of industry. It's very universally applicable. And I'd like to say that defining this plan is not the hard part, right? I'm sure when I walk through it with everybody, you'll see that this speaks for itself. But the key thing, or the hard part about this plan, is the execution. And we'll get into that as we discuss each point. But so the first thing, of course, is to ensure that there is leadership commitment and role modeling. All right, so by leadership commitment, we mean that the very top of the organization has to intrinsically believe, has to be motivated to drive a culture of quality throughout the organization. That means that they don't perceive it as just some tick in the box that has to happen, or it's some marketing aspect that we have to make a lot of noise about but don't actually do. But they have to actually view quality as a strategic key business performance area. They have to sort of understand that if quality is performed correctly, that will lead to all those business results that we discussed earlier, right? Increased revenue, increased profit, lower cost, higher customer satisfaction. So that not only has to be heard, but understood and believed. And then, of course, they have to show a behavior accordingly, right? They have to role model that. So, and that is really key because, again, it's human nature for people to look towards their superiors, their boss, for for what kind of example they're setting. And consciously or subconsciously, we tend to mimic that. And so if we pick up on all these sort of in between the line signals that leadership talks the talk but doesn't walk the walk, that can become a problem, because what happens is people read right through that and then they adjust their own behavior accordingly. All right, the second thing is that now that we've established that quality is super important and it is a strategic imperative and it is something that we're going to drive throughout the business from top to bottom, we have to communicate consistently that good quality is good business to the rest of the organization. And what do we mean by that? We mean a few different things by that. First of all, we need to break down our definition of quality. We need to define quality, and then we need to break it down into meaningful, measurable KPIs that are relevant for each department and each level of the organization. All right, so you'll end up with different objectives depending on the level of the organization and the function of the organization. And what's super important about this communication is that it happens clearly, consistently, regularly, and that we communicate the why, right? So it's not just about the what, but it's about the why. So why are we doing this? Why are these KPIs important? Because again, it's human nature for people to want to understand how they are contributing to the overall outcomes of an organization. People don't like to feel like they're a cog wheel in the machine, a trivial sort of non-relevant part of the machine. People like to feel relevant. And so when we communicate these KPIs, it's super important that we explain to people why these KPIs are important. And that means telling them what the effect is of meeting the KPIs, but also explaining to them what the effect is of not meeting the KPIs. All right, the third thing, now we're getting more into the operations part, is to monitor and discuss quality metrics regularly. So again, said it earlier, this might sound trivial, but I think this is actually something that is quite difficult to do, and doesn't happen as much as you think it would, right? So what it means is that we have to take those objectives that we discussed under point 2, and we have to start implementing them in the organization. That means that we have to start measuring them, we have to start reporting on them, and we have to have a meeting structure or a communication structure around it, some type of governance that allows people to see how they're performing on a periodic basis. Depending on the KPI, that can be daily, hourly, weekly, monthly, yearly. But that needs to be analyzed, that needs to be implemented, and then that needs to be owned and discussed. And what that does is it creates, now we have a system in place where people, A, believe in the benefits of quality, B, they understand what's expected of them, and C, they actually see how they're performing against those KPIs. And that allows them to course correct, right? So it allows them to get some type of energy and motivation, like I'm almost at my KPIs, but not quite. And if I do this, then I can get there, right? That's the kind of thing that motivates people. Points 4 and 5, I think, are more easily understood. But the key point about implementing training development for employees is that, well, first of all, if we set expectations on people and we challenge people to achieve certain goals, then it stands to reason that we have to support them in getting there, right? So there's nothing more frustrating for somebody than being told they need to run in that direction a certain distance at a certain speed, right? But they don't actually get the opportunity to prepare and train for it, right? So they feel like they're getting set up for failure, or they feel like they're just sort of getting wound up and pushed out without any type of support. So implementing training and development for employees that allows them to succeed underlines how important the organization feels this initiative is, and it makes people feel like they're being set up for success. And the last point is, of course, encourage periodic employee feedback. And the reason that we need that is we have to create this loop, right? We're not going to get it right the first time, right? We're going to set incorrect goals. We're going to set, directionally they can be off, or in terms of, the KPIs, they can be too ambitious or not ambitious enough. So we're going to have to make changes along the way. And the best way to ensure that that iteration happens often and frequently, so that we can go through that curve quickly, is by getting people that are actually doing the work to give their feedback. And that achieves two things. First of all, it allows us to make those changes on the fly and quickly. And second of all, it again reinforces the importance of this program to all the individuals. People feel like they're contributing, they feel like their opinion matters. And they see that their opinion actually is heard and gets put into use. All right, so of the last points, the 5 points that I gave you, or the 6 points that I just showed you, the first one was about getting leadership commitment and getting them to role model that. So I know from my conversations that, and I don't have numbers to back this up, but certainly anecdotally, I can say that a lot of people feel that work within the quality domain feel like they are not getting the leadership support that they would like to see in order to really have an impact on quality. And that can have all different kinds of reasons, but what I'd like to do here is maybe give you a handhold, give you some guidance on how you could get leadership to look at quality differently, not just like it's like a function off to the side that needs to prevent bad faulty product from leaving the factory, or some type of thing that we need to do in order to get certain certifications that we need as a license to operate, but really sort of understand and believe that quality is the best way to achieve excellence with the organization, to perform well. So the first thing I'd like to say is that I see a lot of people sort of leaning back and saying, management doesn't get it, leadership doesn't get it. I've explained it to them many times, but they just don't get it. So I'd like to sort of reinforce that it is our job to convince leadership as quality professionals. You'd like leadership to be on board automatically and just get it, but if that's not the case, I think we should take responsibility for that and make it our jobs to try and convince them, right? We need to be the change that we want to see. The second thing is that we need to recognize that business leaders speak the language of business KPIs, which is dollars and cents. So all those things that I showed you, revenue, profit, cost, customer satisfaction, market share, etc., those are things that are meaningful to business leaders. And if we want them to take quality seriously or more seriously, then our job is to show them how quality can have an impact on those things, right? So we need to make a translation, if you will, of quality initiatives and quality investments and how they translate into improved business performance. And the best way I know how to do that is by creating an ROI and using that as a sort of the Rosetta Stone to make that translation between investments in quality, whatever they may be, technology, training, process change, communication, I don't know, whatever is needed, but that will require investment. And the business leadership will want to know, okay, if you want me to spend 50,000, 25,000, 100,000, $1 million, whatever the number is up front, you're going to have to convince me that that's going to return, right? And so an ROI is a great way of doing that. An ROI in the end shows that good quality is good business. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that an ROI is actually relatively easy to develop. Um, there are lots of good tools out there, frameworks out there that allow you to make a translation from an investment, a quality investment, into an ROI. And so it's not a huge investment from your side, from a quality professional side, to actually develop an ROI. I'm sure you all have great ideas on what needs to change. You understand inherently what the gap is that you're trying to close, right? So what I would urge you is to take that knowledge and to build a business case with an ROI that says, dear leadership, I think we can do better. If we make these investments now, then you can expect these outcomes in the future. And what this ROI does, is it not only is a tool for persuasion, right, for getting leadership on board with the value of quality and getting them to invest in it, but it also creates a baseline for tracking. And because leadership, of course, will ask, okay, if I give you this money for this investment, then I'd like you to show me over time that you're making those improvements. And so what you can do is create part of this ROI is a cost of quality framework or a baseline. And you can use that as the starting point for your investment. And you can show that over time, your cost of quality will go down. And that's important, right? Because people like to make sound investments, and it would be our responsibility as quality professionals to prove that, to make the case and then prove that we were right. All right. So I'd like to, on that note about ROI, I'd like to start a separate poll, right? The key question here is how do you measure cost of quality? And the reason I want to ask that question is because measuring cost of quality is one of those things that's not done often enough in my experience, but it is key in order to make your case, right, to build your ROI. So again, results are anonymous. Please chip in. Let us know what your experiences are. Are you able to measure cost of quality? If so, do you do it partially with spreadsheets? Do you do it partially using some type of automation? Are you able to fully measure it but using spreadsheets, or you're fully automated? And I see results flowing in. And yeah, what I see here is, again, sort of a distribution with a skew towards the sort of under automated side of the house, where a pretty significant portion actually of the people do not, or organizations do not, it looks like, measure cost of quality. And the ones that do are able to partially measure it through spreadsheets. And then there are a few that seem like they have slightly more mature operations where they're able to partly or fully measure using a combination of spreadsheets and software. All right, that's super interesting. So yeah, again, I just want to make the point here that measuring cost of quality is sort of similar to the point that I was making ROI, is it might not be as complicated as you think it is. The key thing with cost of quality is that what we're really looking for is trends, right? And there are frameworks that allow you to measure cost of quality pretty accurately and collect enough information to make a baseline. And then the other point that I'll make is that whether to do that with spreadsheets or with software, I think everyone should realize that the state of technology has been advancing, pretty rapidly over the last 10, 15 years. And through the advent of cloud-based software, prices of software have come down dramatically. And the ease of implementation and use has increased significantly. And so what maybe 10 years ago was a huge investment to put in software and to today is a relatively small investment in the grand scheme of things, and does, allow you to really make a huge step forward in terms of measuring your quality, the quality of your operations, and the cost of quality of your operations. So just be aware that that there might be low-hanging fruit out there that your organization is not taking care of. And if you want to wrap that up in a business case and an investment case with an ROI, that's possible. Again, you can use the ROI model to do that. And if anybody would like more information about ROI modeling, we can, please just send me a question, an email after or leave a note, and I'll make sure that I follow up with more information about how to build a business case after this webinar. So what I'm really talking about, or what I was talking about, is using quality management software to automatically record your quality records. The key benefit is that its tracking is continuous, consistent, and error-free. It gives you real-time insight into your performance, and that performance allows you to bring down your overall costs of quality and earn back the quality of your investment. And that investment can be in software, but it can also be in, like I said, in training or in communication or something else. All right, I have come towards the end of the webinar. What I'd like to do is ask you, see if there are any questions from the attendees. If so, please put them in the private chat, and I'd be more than happy to answer them. All right, so I have a few questions rolling in. Let me just sort of get to them here. One question by Sylvia is, she's asking, what are the things that you see going wrong most frequently when trying to build a culture of quality? Great question. So I'll handle this one, Saskia, and then I'll let you do the rest. Everybody, my colleague Saskia Nieuwenhuizen has joined, and she's going to be reading the questions that come in. I'll handle this one by Sylvia. So Sylvia, the thing that I see going wrong most of the time is the ability to achieve leadership buy-in for any quality improvements. So, just sort of in summary, what I see is that a large percentage of the manufacturing industry is, I would say, sort of relatively behind in terms of implementing mature quality operations. And I believe that that's a result of having weak cultures of quality. And I believe that having a weak culture of quality is the result of business leadership not understanding the strategic value of quality operations. And so, hence this webinar, really what I'm trying to say is there's a huge opportunity out there to, to elevate the level of your quality operations. I think it will result in, all the good things that we talked about, higher productivity, revenue, profit, etc. But it all starts with convincing leadership. If they have a short-term focus on results and don't see the longer-term benefits of investing in quality operations and building a culture of quality, it will never happen, right? And so that puts the ball back in our court in convincing leadership. And I think the best way of doing that is through building a business case with an ROI. All right, I hope that answered your question, Sylvia. Any other questions rolling in, Saskia?
Yes, we've got one from Karina. She asks, are there specific costs you take along and control, and are there costs not taking along?
Can you repeat the question, Saskia?
Are there specific costs you take along and control, and are there costs not taking along?
So I'm going to assume that question relates to sort of the previous topic of measuring cost of quality and, as sort of the baseline or the foundation for, for just controlling your cost of quality and showing improvements, but also building the ROI. Absolutely. There's As I said before, there's a very good model that I can share with anyone who's interested in how to break down cost of quality conceptually and mathematically, and then take that template, that framework, if you will, and use it as an overlay for your organization. And then what you do is you pick the key cost elements of your cost of quality system, and based on what's most important for your organization, either based on what contributes a lot to your costs, or could potentially contribute a lot towards your improvements. And then you ignore the rest. So the answer to your question is yes, there are certain things that you ignore, and there are certain things that you include, and that really is contextual. But there is a generic framework and an approach that allows you to do this quite easily for your organization.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question by David. He asks, do you have a mechanism for measuring the baseline of a quality culture? An organization cannot improve unless it knows where it is currently.
Yes, yeah, great question. Yes, yes, there is a good framework for that. So there are direct measurements of culture, and then there are indirect measurements of culture. Most of the measurements, I will say, are indirect. And the reason for that is that, of course, culture is an abstract thing. It has to do with human behavior, as we said, and of course, there are all sorts of other aspects to it, but not everything allows itself to be captured directly. But that's not a problem, because culture is not a goal in and by itself. It's a means to an end. And the end is business results, right? We want to improve. We want to use culture as a tool to improve business results. And business results are very measurable. So the baseline measurement that I would put in place would be a combination of things like cost of quality elements, right? So breaking down your quality operations into appraisal, and preventative cost elements, putting your dipstick in a couple of those ones that are key, measuring that, showing trends. And then the other elements are around process compliance, mostly around process compliance, but also things like customer satisfaction, et cetera. And those are derivative measurements, but very good indicators of your culture of quality. And one other point I'll make here is that a lot of times organizations abort this type of initiative because they get frustrated that these things are, abstract and difficult to measure and maybe not easily measured precisely. But the point I will make here is that it's much more, don't obsess too much about accuracy, because while it has to be, of course, relatively accurate, it has to be accurate enough to, make sense. It doesn't have to be super accurate, because it's not about the absolute numbers. It's about the trends, right? In the end, what we care about is showing positive development. And so whatever your measurement deviations are, as long as you can show that the investments that you're making in culture are showing an improvement, that's good enough to justify your ROI.
Okay, I've got another one from John. He asks, how would an organization prepare for the journey in moving from a paper manual cost of quality system to a digital cost of quality software solution?
Yeah, great question, John. Thank you. So what's underlying this question really is, sort of going back to our second survey, how important is it to automate, right, versus use paper administration or spreadsheets, et cetera. So obviously the key priority is about having strong quality operations. And whether or not those quality operations are underpinned by automation is sort of irrelevant. However, when quality operations are bogged down by administrative issues, and when managing quality operations is all about managing information, right? It's all about being able to measure relevant things and then using that information to communicate to people that can affect a positive change, right? So it is purely, I would almost say, not purely, but primarily about information management. And it's totally possible to do that with, Word documents and with spreadsheets and even just paper, pen and paper or whatever. But when it becomes so inefficient that hampers your operations, then, automation is a great way of improving that, of sort of removing that resistance. And like I said before, cost of automation has gone down, significantly in the last 10 years. So I think a lot of people are hesitant to automate because they are thinking about, software projects that they've done years ago. But, the world has changed. Technology has matured. It's become much easier to implement, and it's much cheaper to use and operate. So I would definitely recommend people look at, bringing in some type of software to help them make these transformational changes. And you can embed those costs in your ROI, and you'll see that they're actually quite a small part of the overall ROI. It's not really going to move the needle in a negative sense.
Okay, and then I've got one final question by Shifra, which is, will you share an example of how you manage people who are resistant to adopt to a more progressive quality culture? And it may not be something that you can do now, looking at the time, but maybe you can share something later.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to just say, give Shifra a short answer, and then I can follow up with her in more detail after if necessary. But so what it really, what's not in your question is whether or not we're talking about leadership or, people that are in your team, so to speak, or right. But I think in general, the answer is first you need to get leadership on board, right? Because if people are resistant to change, that's usually indicative of leadership not pushing this as a priority. And so I would start with, convincing leadership that whatever change it is that you would like to make is important. That might require you to show how it's important and why it's important, right? And then we're back to the ROI and the business case. But once leadership is on board, then I find it's much easier to overcome resistance. If you're trying to manage people that are resistant from a quality team perspective, right? People that don't report to you, then it's much more difficult. So I hope that answered your question, Shifra. And happy to follow up with you in more detail after if you'd like.
Okay, that was it for the question.
All right, excellent. Well, we've come to the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everyone for their active contributions, great questions. I hope you thought this was useful. If anybody would like to get more information, let me know. I have more information on how to build a business case and an ROI. I have more information on how to measure cost of quality. I have more information on how to, run a culture change project. So feel free to tap me for any of those topics. And yeah, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance. Thank you.